Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Michael Penn. I'm of the Shingetsu News Agency, and I'm the vice president of this club. We have a special press conference today. I think many of you were aware that we had it scheduled about a week ago, and then we had a delay, but finally we were able to get it back online. So this press conference is about an issue which is a difficult issue, but a very important issue, especially for foreign communities in Japan. Japan, as we all know, has a very good and impressive record when it comes to supporting human rights issues and important issues of development overseas. But its record becomes much less impressive as we get back to the home territory. And in particular, Japan's record on refugees and the recognition of refugees is pretty bad. And to sort of highlight how this is the truth and is the situation, we're looking today at the case of Syria. And Syria, as we all know, is one of the most troubled regions in the world right now. It's had a civil war going on for several years. Tens of thousands of people have been dying. And not surprisingly, people are trying to get out of that country and trying to find peaceful lives in other places. A few of them are coming to Japan, and we're going to find out about the experience of at least one man who's been doing that, who has done that, and his struggles to be recognized by the Japanese government as a refugee. The man I'm referring to, of course, is in the middle here. His name is Mr. Youssef Jodi, and he has been applying for refugee status here in Japan. And here next to me is Mr. Hiroshi Miyauchi, who is an attorney at law, who I gather has been specialized or working very hard on refugee issues for quite some time. So he's very knowledgeable on the state of this issue as it applies to Japan. And on the far end, we have our interpreter, and a very, very talented interpreter. He actually could run between 3 languages. That's Arabic, English, and Japanese. So that's very shockingly impressive. So, all right. Well, first of all, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Miyauchi to give us the framework of the issue. And then after that, we'll move directly to Mr. Jodi, who will give his presentation in Arabic, translated by our interpreter. And then we'll open it up for your questions. I see that we don't have a lot of quantity of people in the audience today, but I'm looking forward to great quality, which means please think about what questions you'd like to ask them, since we do have a time to interact with them. All right, Mr. Miyauchi, please.
Okay. Hello again. My name is Hiroshi Miyauchi. I'm an attorney at law here in Japan. First, I'd like to apologize for we having this conference 1 week delayed of what we prepared before. Well, by starting, I would like to explain that last week, on the 17th of March, 4 applicants who are Syrian refugees have made a lawsuit to the Tokyo District Court. What we have demanded in the lawsuit is for the court to confirm the nullity of the rejection decision from the Ministry of Justice, and also for the court to hand down a decision to oblige the Ministry of Justice to grant refugee status to the 4 applicants. So these are 2 claims that we have made to the Tokyo District Court. I'd like to give a brief summary about the background of this case. The 4 applicants are all Syrians. They are ranging from 21 to 35 years old, and they're all males. They have come to Japan from June to August 2012, which is about 3 years ago now, and all have applied for refugee status to the Ministry of Justice. 3 of the 4 are from the Kurds regions in Syria, and 1 of them are from the southern part of Syria. all have received a rejection decision of refugee status from the Minister of Justice from the period of January to February 2013. They were rejected of their refugee status. However, they have received the special permission to stay based on humanitarian grounds, which is also a procedure inside the Immigration Control and Refugee Recognition Act in Japan. However, as we are not satisfied with the decision of the Ministry of Justice to reject the refugee status and only to grant special permission to stay on humanitarian grounds, we have come to the conclusion of making this lawsuit. So I'd like to explain a little bit more. I'd like to elaborate a little bit more about the purpose of this lawsuit, this litigation. As you know, the situation in Syria is deteriorating every year. Now, more than 3.9 million people have fled Syria based on UNHCR statistics. For the reasons that the applicants' stay in Japan are starting to become prolonged and they are becoming more and more settled here in Japan, we want them to have a very stable status to be able to ensure their livelihood here in Japan. Though the four have been granted special permission to stay, giving them at least a 1-year visa to stay in Japan, since they have been denied of the refugee status, they are denied of accessing to benefits which refugees, only refugee convention refugees are able to receive here. Like I said before, they have only 1-year visa status, and they need to extend that every year, renew that visa every year, whereas a refugee will be granted usually a 5-year visa status. Because they are not recognized as refugees, they will also be not able to receive some of the benefits like the ones from the RHQ, which is refugee headquarters in Japan, where they provide Japanese education and work training for refugees. They will not be able to be issued a refugee passport, refugee document, and also they will be facing some problems in their everyday lives. So we think it's very important and essential that these people who are indeed refugees to be recognized as refugees and not as just merely people with special permission to stay on humanitarian grounds. Just to give you a brief kind of explanation about these two, refugee status is status based on the Refugee Convention, 1951 Refugee Convention, and 1967 Refugee, the Protocol on Refugee. And this refugee status is something which is mandatory for the government to grant. There's no discretion of the government to not grant refugee status to a person who will fulfill the definition of refugee. However, the special permission to stay, this is based on the Immigration Bureau explanation, is a completely discretional decision by the Ministry of Justice, which when the Ministry of Justice finds that there are some humanitarian reasons to permit someone to stay in Japan, will grant this permission to stay. So these two have completely different grounds. So, of course, we think a refugee, we believe that these four Syrians are refugees, they should be granted refugee status. And also, we wanted to also to emphasize the Japan role towards this Syria crisis. As you know, Japan has been providing many ODAs outside, off seas. However, when when talking about refugees here in Japan, Syrian refugees here in Japan, by the end of last year, November, 61 applications has been launched by refugees from Syrian, refugee applicants from Syria, and all have been denied of refugee status, which makes it 0% at that point. We have found out that by the end of last year, meaning somewhere in December, 3 Syrians were granted refugee status, but still, there has been over 60 applications, and only 3 has been admitted as refugee in Japan. This is highly contrary to the situation in other countries, other UNHCR countries, party state countries. For instance, from statistics from the UNHCR and of the annual statistics of 2013, for instance, the US has recognized over 91% Syrians as refugees, UK at 92%, Australia 98%, Canada 93%. So as you can see, in other countries which are participatory to the Refugee Convention, they have a very high rate of Syrian to be recognized as refugee. And of course, that is something that is completely comprehensible when considering the situation in Syria. So from this case, we want to emphasize that it is not only giving out money off seas is the role of the humanitarian role of Japan, but also to recognize Syrians refugees here in Japan. So we don't want to have a two-sided, two-faced kind of humanitarian assistance. We want humanitarian aid to be provided off seas and also inside our country as well. What's happening in Japan is there is complete contradiction between what's done outside and what's here. So we want to emphasize this point, and that is one of our objective of this litigation, of course. Just from a legal expert standpoint, I'll just like to explain about why is it so difficult to be recognized as a refugee in Japan. As I have explained, the 1950 Run Refugee Convention is the key document of recognizing a refugee. The criteria for refugee is set down inside that convention. Inside a definition, the key criteria there will be the wording of well-founded fear of persecution. Maybe you have heard of this word. The problem comes, what is well-founded fear? This is a matter of interpretation. In such countries as in the US or maybe in Australia or Canada, a person who has a reasonable chance or a real chance of being persecuted will be recognized as someone who has a well-founded fear of persecution. And that possibility is said to be, of course, less than 50% and even less than 10%. However, in Japan, this criteria, this threshold of well-founded fear is understood very, very rigidly and strictly. Usually, the Ministry of Justice and the court will use the phrase that the person needs to be singled out or stand out to an extent that he or she will gather or collect concerns and interests from the state, from the government. As for a maybe famous person who has been very active and well known and well publicized maybe fulfill this kind of a criteria. But in situation where you have Syria, where the Syrian government does not have the ability or even the will to protect its citizen, and people are fleeing its country from of course, the Syrian government, or it can be from other radical groups, but they are in need of protection, it will be very difficult to fulfill the threshold as the interpretation of the government of Japan and the court. We think that is also a big problem here in Japan. So through this Syrian refugee case, we will also want to ask the court to challenge its precedents and the Ministry of Justice interpretation of the Refugee Convention. and come to a conclusion which is consistent with international standards. So this is our case, a summary of our case. Thank you for listening.
Okay, well, now I would like to ask Mr. Joudi to give us some comments of his own, and our interpreter will help us. So try to make it like about 1 minute length, and then let the interpreter do his job.
نعم. أنا اسمي جودي يوسف، أنا كردي من سوريا. أنا طلعت من سوريا لأني شاركت ضد النظام السوري، وأنا هربت من سوريا لأني كنت مطلوب من الدولة السورية.
My name is Youssef Joudi, and he is from Syria, basically from the Kurd area in Syria. He participated in activities against the Syrian government, and that's why he had to run away from Syria because there were too much violence against him in the country.
نعم، أنا ما كنت أعرف إني جاي لدولة اسمها اليابان. أنا كنت ذاهب إلى الدولة البريطانية. كان لي أخ في بريطانيا كنت أريد أذهب لعنده. والحالة اللي كنت فيها يعني كنت مجبور بأي حالة أطلع، والمهرب جابني لليابان.
In the first place, he had no intention to come to Japan. He was basically going to his brother in Britain, and then the man responsible for smuggling him outside Syria, he had no clue where he was actually going.
صراحة أنا ما كنت أعرف إنه بحياتي إني كنت أسمع إنه في دولة اسمها اليابان عندها تقنية، بس إني أجي على اليابان ما كنت أعرف بحياتي إنه يصير معي هيك شيء. وجيت إلى اليابان، والمهرب على أساس من اليابان يأخذني لبريطانيا وأخذني إلى فرنسا.
So all he knew about Japan before coming was just its well-developed country. That's all he knew about this country. And when he arrived to Japan, the smuggler promised him to take him to Britain. But in the first place, he was taken from Japan to France.
وفرنسا طلبوا مني إني أعطي لجوءي، وأنا ما كنت أفهم على الدولة الفرنسية، والمترجم كان عن طريق الهاتف. هم بالأخير يعني الدولة الفرنسية كمان ربطتني ورجعتني إلى اليابان مرة ثانية.
يعني هم وعدوك بأنهم يدوك اللجوء في فرنسا؟
طلبوا مني أعطي لجوئي في فرنسا، ولكن أنا كنت ذاهب إلى الدولة البريطانية، ما كنت جاي على فرنسا.
And while he was in France, they asked him that he has to apply for refugee status in France, but he wanted to go to Britain in the first place. And he had a lot of problems because all went through translation and interpreting, and he doesn't speak French, and he had no clue what exactly he should do legally speaking.
يعني كان عندي محكمة بفرنسا على أساس عندي محكمة يحكموني، ولكن ثاني يوم ربطوني ورجعوني إلى اليابان.
So there was a court held for him in France, and the conclusion was that they obligated him to come back again to Japan.
وضليت شهرين باليابان كمان، ما كنت أعطي لجوئي باليابان كمان، لأني كنت ناوي أذهب عند أخوي في بريطانيا، ولكن أعطيت لجوئي في اليابان، وضلي 2.5 عم بحاول أجيب أولادي، وبالأخير جبتهم. يعني صراحة يعني صار معي كثير مشاكل لجبت أولادي للدولة اليابانية.
And as he said, he was going to Britain, so when he found out it's not going to be the way he thought, he will not be able to go to Britain, so he knew then that he has to apply for refugee status here in Japan. And after 2.5 years from arriving here to Japan, he called his family and his kids, but he says that since then life has been real difficult for him, and he can't like live normal life in here.
يعني صراحة يعني أولادي لهلا كمان ما عندهم حنان الأب، يعني أحيانا عم ناديون يجوا لعندي ما يعرفوني، يعني ضليت ابني ما شفته. هون باليابان شفته وبنتي هي صغيرة تركتها يعني 2.5 ضليت بعيد عن أولادي.
And because he spent all this time away from his family and from his children, when they first came to Japan, they didn't recognize him actually, and it was a lot of suffering for him. They didn't know him when he called his boy or his little girl that didn't even see him until she came here to Japan. He wasn't there when she was born. They wouldn't come to him because they don't actually know who this person is.
لا أنا عندي مشكلة أكبر من المشكلة اللي أنا فيها. يعني صار لي فترة وأنا بهالمشاكل ما عندي حق باليابان. وهذيك المرة بالمقابلة المحكمة اللي قبل هاي سألني أحد الصحفيين إنه شو المشكلة الأساسية اللي عندك. يعني خبرته إنه المشكلة الأساسية أولادي أريد يدخلوا مدارس، ما عندي حق باليابان، أريد أدخل المدارس، أريد يدرسوا.
Okay. Since he came here, he faced a lot of so many problems in Japan. But the biggest problem, and also he was asked in the court last time in the court, what's the biggest issue he's facing here in Japan, and he answered that the biggest one is he has absolutely no rights in this country in Japan, and he needs to put his children in a school and to give them good education in this country, but he cannot do any of these things.
صراحة أنا جاي من المستشفى، يعني أولادي اثنيناتهم كانوا بالمستشفى. يعني احترق من 3 أيام احترق رجل ابني وظهر بنتي يعني.
So he's saying now he just came from the hospital, and he has 2 children and 1 boy, 1 little girl, and
نعم ابني وبنتي اثنيناتهم احترقوا.
His boy and little girl they have been burned in the leg and in the back.
هاي صورة رجل ابني.
This is my son's photo.
يعني عندي كثير مشاكل في اليابان، لا أعرف اللغة ولا أعرف وين أروح. يعني في عندي مشاكل كثيرة وأولادي لا عندهم حق ولا عندي حق. يعني ما بعرف بدي أدرس بهالدولة أتعلم اللغة ولا أنا بدي انطرد من هالدولة ولا شو بدي أسوي ما عاد أعرف.
So as you can see, this is his son's photo, and this is his biggest concern in Japan, that he cannot practice any rights and he cannot do anything useful or helpful for his children. He doesn't speak the Japanese language. He wants to speak language and to be able to live here as any other citizen or foreigner, but he cannot do any of this.
يعني أروح عند الدكتور كيف أحكي معه ما بعرف، شلون بدي أقول له ما بعرف، الإسعاف شلون بدي أجيبه ما بعرف. يعني في كتير مشاكل.
So in such an emergency, when he's trying to reach out for a doctor, he doesn't know what to say. He doesn't know how to communicate with the doctor, with the hospital, with any of people that might assist him. He's facing an issue with the language.
يعني الدولة اليابانية أعطتني فيزا سنة، صار لي هاي السنة الثالثة عم بجدد، وطلبوا مني الإثباتات اللي إني تدل إني فعلا ضد النظام وإني فعلا ما ضل إثبات وما أي إثبات طلبوا مني أنا جبت لهم. وهاي المحاميين وعندي كل الإثباتات يشهد إنه ما كان معي أي شيء لما جيت على اليابان. طلبوا مني كتير إثباتات وأنا جبت لهم كل الإثباتات وبالأخير رفضوني.
So he has been granted a 1-year visa since he came, and he's been renewing year by year. So it's his 3rd year in Japan, and he submitted all the documents the Japanese government required to grant him the refugee status, and he has proven that he's against the Syrian government, and he's facing a lot of problems in his country, and yet they didn't agree to his request to be granted the refugee status, and he's so lost and doesn't know what to do from here.
يعني هلا أولادي بسجن، أنا ما بعرف شو بده يصير معاهم. صار معاهم مشكلة كيف بده يكونوا، مين بده ياخذهم، مين بده يجيبهم، شلون بده يمشون حالهم ما يعرفوا يطلعوا لبرا. يعني لو معي حق عند أدخل المدارس أو لو عندي باسبورت كنت طلعت من هالدولة، بس ما عندي أي شيء أنا متعلق هون.
So also his children now they are living in like a prison because they cannot do anything, and in any case of emergency they don't know who can help them, how to communicate with people, and he doesn't even have a passport, even if he wants to go out of this country of Japan, he doesn't have his passport even.
ونعم يعني أنا شكرا جزيلا.
And he thanks you a lot. Thank you very much for your listening. Okay.
Okay. Well, we just hit exactly the halfway point in our schedule for today. So I would like to ask for questions from the floor. When I call on you, please move over to the microphone over there. Give your name and affiliation. And since I think we can probably allow you to ask several questions if you want to follow up. So would anybody like to start? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Per Bodner. I'm from Sweden, photographer. I don't write, at least publicly. In Sweden, I was reading right now on the internet, in an interview to the Swedish government, they have planned to receive 100,000 refugees, and that was in autumn last year. So I don't know the figures now, but it's a huge figure. I would say shame on the Japanese authorities, shame that they don't grant this gentleman asylum and others that are applying for it. Shame on the Japanese government.
Per, would you like a question that you'd like to address to one of them or both of them?
No, I don't have anything more right now.
All right. Well, let me sort of phrase that as a question. Do you find that this policy is a shameful policy?
We're talking about Sweden. I was in Sweden, in Stockholm last year, November. At that point, there were 80,000 refugees recognized in Sweden last year. At that point, so I believe the number raised to 100,000 people. Yeah. With a country with a population a little bit over 9 million, I think, right?
9 million.
Yeah. And 100,000 refugees. I think a lot from Syria, Eritrea. It's very surprising because we have 120 million people living in Japan. Last year, we recognized 11 refugees. And the number of special permission to stay on humanitarian grounds, like Mr. Joudi here, was I think 110. So adding those two, even it's around 120. Very, very small in population number and also in percentage to population ratio compared to your country, Sweden. So I have to say this is a very disappointing figure of our country, which I think really reflects upon the importance of human rights. The importance of human rights, the weight of human rights here in Japan. So, of course, refugee problem is a problem that which really points out the conviction towards the government's conviction towards protecting human rights here. So I have to say, if this number does not raise, if it doesn't increase to which is consistent with other countries which are developed and are set to protect human rights, guarantee human rights, how much aid we provide outside, we will still be secondary country when it comes to human rights protection. So I think we need to change the situation, yes.
Okay. So it's probably better to have him answer that question. So yes, Natalie, go ahead. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Natalie Stuckey. I'm a freelance journalist. First to Mr. Joudi. What kind of a passport do you have right now? Do you have a Syrian passport? During the 3 years, you want to translate?
Okay.
First,
نوع الباسبور اللي معاك دلوقتي
ما عندي أي شيء.
ما فيش أي باسبور. He doesn't have any passport right now.
Okay. And during the 3 years you were in Japan, how did you support yourself? I think with the special status you could work.
وخلال 3 سنوات في اليابان هنا يعني كنت بتعيش ازاي او اتصرف في الفلوس ازاي؟ يعني بتقول الوضع بتاعك اللي هو الفيزا للسنه دي كنت من حقك تشتغل صح؟
يعني نعم أنا كنت أشتغل يعني أنا
اوكي
يعني أنا اشتغلت مشان أجيب أولادي يعني اشتغلت بالدولة اليابانية. نعم كنت أشتغل
خلال ال3 أعوام
لا الدولة اليابانية أول ما جيت أنا ما كنت أعرف شيء. كانت تساعدني منظمة جار كانت تساعدني
بس
يعني بعدين أنا اشتغلت. نعم.
So when he first came here, he didn't know anything, and he's been just receiving aids from the jail and other organizations. But after that, he started working in Japan.
What kind of job do you do?
شغل ايه العمل اللي كنت بتأديه فيه؟
أنا اشتغلت مع شركة لواحد كردي من تركيا. يعني أنا ما كنت أعرف اللغة اليابانية. اشتغلت معه يعني كان ينقل حوالي لدول برا اليابان.
شحن وكده؟
شحن نعم. والآن الشغل كمان خف يعني ما ضل شغل كمان يعني.
He was working in a company owned by a Turkish Kurdi guy, and it's in the shipping field. But now work is so much less, and he's no longer working with him.
And I have one more question for Miyauchi Sensei. You said after November, 3 Syrians were granted refugee status. Were these 3 Syrians anti-Assad government activists, or?
Well, I'm not the representative of. I have not represented these 3 Syrian refugees. I'm not really fond with that, who their background. So I might not be competent to answer to that question. So.
Well, let me follow up on that 1 second. Do you have any idea why those 3 in particular were granted status by the government? Was there something special about their cases, so far as you know?
Well, this is only what do you call it, a prediction, but like I said before, the threshold of well-founded fear is very difficult, very high in Japan. So I assume that these people were people who were very aggressive or very active and who were very stand out to the point where the Japanese government were also comfortable with the decision that if they return, upon their return, they will probably immediately arrested or tortured. Probably they were people with some maybe past experience of these persecutions. However, I'm not really familiar with their case, so this is only what I assume from the practice here in Japan. Yeah.
Okay. Additional questions? Please.
Hello, I'm not a journalist, so I apologize. My questions are slightly more boring. I'm Shosanna from the Embassy of Canada here in Japan. I was interested first in if you were involved with Japan NGOs working in refugee rights. If so, what kind of support were you able to found, and which organizations are you collaborating with? Also, I was curious if you could give more details about the kind of health services access you have in Japan. And I think that in the past, the government of Japan put in place specific programs for welcoming refugees of particular countries in Asia. And I was wondering if it was part of your advocacy activities to influence or encourage the government of Japan to put in place such specific programs for Syrian refugees. Thank you.
questions for?
It's mostly for you.
For me?
Yeah, 'cause
Oh, okay.
you've got the most knowledge on it.
Okay. Well, first regarding the point of collaborations with NGOs, yes, we have been assisted by an NGO group, which is very famous for refugee assistance in Japan, called Japan Associations for Refugees. That's a jar that was mentioned by Mr. Joseph before. And of course, without these aid of NGOs, refugees, especially refugee applicants who's been still going through the procedure, will have very difficulties getting their way through the Japanese society. So, of course, these aids are very prominent for us as well as lawyers. Regarding house service access, people who receive special permission to stay and they have a visa for 1 year will also be qualified to enter the national house service system in Japan. So in that meaning, there will not be a difference between nationals, Japanese nationals, and people with that level of protection. Okay. When it comes to also you talked about resettlement programs and whether these resettlement programs are benefiting other refugees. Yes, Japan have started with the resettlement program. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, with Myanmarese refugees who were in refugee camps in Thailand. And the number is very small, though, around 30 per year. And I think there are some discussions that they're going to expand this resettlement programs to maybe other countries. But still, if that resulting into good effects to refugees who's been present here in Japan, it's quite difficult to see. The numbers of refugees remain very small, and the percentage remains very low. And usually resettlement refugees will go into a program which has been initiated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they will receive Japanese education and some Japanese cultural education training in order for them to integrate more easily into the Japanese society. But I heard there are many problems with these kind of programs as well. It's not well coordinated refugee-oriented programs. But these are accessed by these resettled refugees, not from refugees or people with permission for special stay here in Japan. So in that meaning, not real difference. Like I said before, if you're admitted as refugees, you'll be able to receive these kind of programs. But the number, of course, is very small. Only a handful of people will be receiving this program per year. But in the past, yes, I have cases I heard where refugees, which were recognized, were able to go to attend to these schools and were able to construct their Japanese language, and then go into other schools, maybe like secondary schools and high schools. So yes, I think there's a lot of difference between just being permitted special permission to stay or being recognized as a refugee, genuine refugee. Yeah.
May I address part of that question to Mr. Joudi? On a daily basis or in your regular life, how much interaction do you have with NGO supporters?
يعني هو بيسألك في حالتك أنت تمام ما مدى التعاون اللي لقيته من منظمة ال NGO دي تمام كمشاركة يومية أو كدعم ليك في الحياة اليومية هنا في اليابان؟
يعني من أول ما جيت.
So since he came to Japan, right?
صراحة يعني عطوني بس ما كان يكفي، بس ما قصروا معي يعني. أول فترة كانوا يعطوني يمكن 30,000 للشهر يمكن. وصراحة يعني هون تروح تشتري بندورة تشتري 200 ين 250 ين يعني الحياة صعبة.
He says they have been doing a good effort with him, and since he came in the beginning, they give him like a monthly salary of 30,000 yen every month. But life is so expensive here. If he tries to buy food or vegetables or anything, the money usually was not enough to survive in here.
صارت ضلوا فترة هيك يساعدوني بعدين قلبوني على البلدية على الدولة اليابانية. يعني الدولة اليابانية كانت تعطيني إيجار البيت تقريبا 50,000 بالشهر.
كانوا بيعطوك الإيجار ليك أنت مش؟
كان أنا وثلاثة أبناء وعمومي معي هون باليابان. كان يعطوني 30,000 كان يعطوا إيجار البيت وتقريبا 50,000.
يعني توصل إن هم بيدفعوا عنك إيجار البيت؟ بيدفعوا بدالك يعني الإيجار ولا بيعطوك فلوس في إيدك؟
لا يعطوني فلوس أنا أدفع للبيت يعني.
50,000. 50,000؟
لا ما عدا ال 50,000 كانوا يعطوا 60,000 لإيجار البيت.
So, but time was passing, and the support, the NGO like transferred him to the Japanese municipality. They took responsibility of him, and at this time he was being paid around 50,000 yen, including his rental house for him and his family as well.
والآن أنا كنت أشتغل هلا شغلي كمان واقف يعني لسه. أنا قلت للمنظمة الجارة إنه يساعدوني بهالفترة لبين ما ألاقي شغل جديد ولسه الأوراق عم تمشي لسه ما طلعت نتيجة.
And since he has not been working recently, and he addressed the jail regarding this, that he just needs them to help him until he finds another job. But he says everything takes a long time, and he hasn't received anything yet from them.
How about socially? I mean, are people visiting him? Is he have any sort of social outlet whatsoever? Or are NGO people coming and talk to him once a week? I mean, how often does he interact with them actually?
طيب وعلى المستوى الاجتماعي يعني بيزوروك مثلا في ناس من المنظمة دي ال NGO بيجوا بيزوروك أو بيتواصلوا معاك أو بيساعدوك مثلا نصائح أو كده عامة غير الجزء المادي يعني في تواصل معاهم بيجوا لك ولا؟
نعم في تواصل يعني أنا أعتقد لو مو منهم يعني ما كان يصير معي كتير مشاكل في اليابان يعني
بيزوروك في البيت
يمكن ما كنت باليابان أو ميت أنا. نعم يساعدوني.
He says actually he receives a lot of help from them, and yes, they do visit him socially, and they come to him regularly, and without their help, he wouldn't have survived all this time here in Japan.
I don't have any idea of how this works, but if you could explain, isn't there embassy or consulate Syrian here in Tokyo, here in Japan? Is there?
هو بيحاول يفهم الموضوع ماشي ازاي. بيقول لك يعني في سفارة للدولة السورية هنا في اليابان او في طوكيو، في اي قنصلية سفارة ملحقية؟
والله حسب اعتقادي فيه، بس انا يعني لا رحت له ولا اقدر اروح لاني انا مطلوب من قبل الدولة السورية.
No, as far as he knows, of course, there is a Syrian embassy here in Tokyo, but he had never gone there, and he cannot go because he's wanted from the Syrian government.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Natalie, did you have something?
Back in Syria, could you explain us what kind of violence you were facing? How was your daily life?
Okay. بتسألك بخصوص العنف اللي كنت بتواجهه في سوريا، يعني مثلا التفاصيل او الحياة اليومية كان ايه نوعية العنف؟
الدولة السورية يعني داهمت بيتي مرتين ثلاثة. يعني أول ما هربت يعني كانت مداهمة بيتي بتدور علي لأني كنت أشارك ضد النظام السوري. أنا قبل ما كنت شارك ضد النظام السوري بأول الأحداث، بس بعدين شفت أشياء بعيني، يعني الظلم، شفت كيف الأطفال تنقتل وكيف المشردين. يعني أنا طلعت ضد هالنظام، يعني ما أريد هيك نظام يعني يحكمنا.
So he says in the beginning of the Syrian revolution, he didn't have any part. He didn't participate with any of the conflict part. But when he saw actually what was going on and what, the much killing the government was doing and killing children and so much violence, he eventually had to participate. And as a result of this, he was against the government, and as a result, he had to run away eventually from his country. And when he ran away, the Syrian government attacked his house like 2 or 3 times, searching for him. And there was too much violence regarding his family in there. Yeah.
هو أنا انطلبت من النظام السوري لأن أنا من عائلة معروفة بسوريا وعائلة غنية. يعني أنا لما كنت أشارك ضد النظام كان الكثير يطالعوا معي. يعني
كتير إيه؟
يعني في كثير عالم كانت تطالع معي. أنا طالع العالم ضد هالنظام. يعني
بيشاركوا معاك.
نعم.
He says he's from a well-known family in Syria, a rich family as well, and that's why whenever he participated in any activity against the government, there was too many people supporting him, like from his own town or from own village. They were sympathized with him and participated with him.
نعم، هذول بالإنترنت موجودات. يعني كنت أشارك ضد هذا النظام. يعني بالإنترنت موجود إني كنت أشارك ضد هالنظام السوري.
And yet this is all on the internet, YouTube. His demonstration, the demonstrations he participated in against the Syrian government. Mm-hmm.
يعني في كتير أدلة أنا قدمت للدولة السورية، الدولة اليابانية، أني فعلا أنا مطلوب من قبل السلطات السورية، ولكن والله مع الأسف يعني أعطوني رفض.
And so this, among other evidence, so many evidence that he submitted to the Japanese government, but yet they refused his request for refugee.
Okay, I have a question for Mr. Miyauchi. Yes. And partially this is as a lawyer, but it's also a question for you as a Japanese and a participant in the society. How do you explain Japan's reluctance to accept refugees and refugee status? I mean, as you've pointed out, statistically, it's very clear that this government and this society has been very reluctant to acknowledge refugees and to have them in this country. On a percentage basis, it's very, very small compared to Sweden and other countries. I mean, obviously, in every country, there's some reluctance to have refugees and foreigners of different kinds living in their societies. What makes Japan a special case in this respect as a developed country?
Well, that is a very difficult question to answer legally, and also from a Japanese aspect as well. But one thing I can point out here is that Japan has a very small number of population of foreign nationals compared to other developed countries. I think the percentage is about 2%, and this is very small. As you can see, our immigration policy is very strict and very conservative in a way. And only limited people will have access to come here to Japan and to live. And this immigration policy, I think, is also very influencing the refugee policy also in Japan. As I said before, the law, the domestic law, which is pertaining to the refugee protection, refugee status, is the law called the Immigration Control and Refugee Recognition Act. Refugee recognition is done by the Ministry of Justice, which also operates the Immigration Bureau. So this immigration control and refugee recognition are very closely blended in. Of course, if you ask the authority, they will say, okay, it's different. They're both in the same immigration bureau, but they're done by different authorized members, officials, and they're different. But from what I believe is the very strict operation on the immigration control is also kind of influencing the refugee the practice, the interpretation, and as you can see, that is coming out as the statistics. Also, one thing you can say is, this is more from a legal standpoint, but the reluctance of adhering to international norms. This is not only the case of refugees, but Japan has been given a lot of recommendations from various UN bodies, such as the Committee Against Torture, the Human Rights Committee, the Committee on the Rights of Child, on various different kind of various agendas. And immigration refugees is also listed up on them as well. But as you can see, there has not been a lot of change here. And as you can see, we don't have individual complaint mechanism as also other developed countries. This makes our practice here in Japan as lawyers really dominated by domestic laws, domestic norms. Meaning that this state side and also the judiciary are not really familiar or really keen in using international norms and giving out the decisions or solving problems. If you point out some cases, precedents from other countries, such as US or UK or even Korea, which has really improved over the last few years, the government and the judge will say, okay, those are practices in other countries and they are not binding on our country. And the interpretation of the Refugee Convention is solely of the authority of the state. So we are the one who will interpret it in our own way. This is something really different from other countries' practice and other notions of judges and decision makers I've seen in other countries. So this reluctance of being adhering and trying to be consistent and with with the international standards also is giving a bad influence, bad impact on refugees, which under the Refugee Convention states that the problem which must be dealt with the cooperation with the international society. So we should not be going on with our own interpretation and only recognizing under 1% refugees, but we should be looking at more what is happening outside in other countries and try to follow what's happening there. To be really achieving the purpose of this convention. So if I am going to stick out 2 points here, I'll have to say that one is very blended immigration policy and refugee policy, and also the reluctance of adhering to international standards and norms. Okay.
Let me follow up on one power that be in this society, which is also for you, Mr. Miyauchi, is the media. Yeah. Japanese general public has a strong humanitarian emotional strain. If they're shown a story which they see as clearly unjust or kawaiso, they will usually respond. Are you able to get the attention that you need from the Japanese press to get the story out so that the public knows what's going on?
Well, I think it's a very important point that Mr. Penn's pointed out right now about the media and also public awareness. The population of refugees are very small. We're very outnumbered, but we are gradually, I think, gaining more interest in the Japanese society by like these very courageous 4 applicants in this case, and other refugees who have come out to speak out about their situation. I think more and more people in Japan are starting to recognize that refugee problem is not just a problem outside in the Middle East or outside in Africa or outside in Myanmar, but it's also a problem here in Japan. what is, I think, important is how we relate that problem to individual problems here, the citizens in Japan. It's not only a kawaiso problem. I think it's a problem which relates to human rights, which I think it relates to everybody in society. I think our next step is trying to gain more interest and to gain more, I think, understanding about these issues, not just being other people's issues, but their own individuals' issues in society. So I think that's a point that we really need to promote more and to really collaborate with the media.
Okay, well, we've reached the end of our time, but for those of you who are journalists and who would like to follow up on this story with other questions, they will stay by for a couple of minutes to exchange meishi so that you can ask your additional questions when you have them later on. But first of all, I'd like to thank our two guests for coming here and for highlighting an issue which we all hope will move in a positive direction in the near future. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much.